Hey everyone, last week I did a video on the Coney Island boardwalk, but while I was on Coney Island, another idea came to my mind. You see, when I began filming for last week's video, I actually parked my car and began my walk in the Kaiser Park, which is just few streets away from the Coney Island beach on the other side of the peninsula. I feel like this is the part much less known or traveled unless you are a local. But from this side, you actually have really nice views of the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, and in general, it's actually a really nice walk on a beautiful day like this was. You even see some people fishing along the way. If you're doing this for sport or relaxation, then sure, go for it. It could be fun. But fishing in order to eat it, I don't know about that one. I would not really go down that route myself, nor recommend it to anyone else. These are probably not the cleanest waters around New York City. But don't take my word for it, just do what I do. Walk around a lot. And if you cover enough ground, you will see it for yourself. From discovering an abandoned bike to this spot, where you have a shopping cart, a car seat, even a scooter. It's basically like a whole aisle from Costco washed ashore. By the way, one thing I did not mention in my previous video about Coney Island is the fact that at one point, Coney Island was completely separated from the rest of Brooklyn by the Coney Island Creek. And so it was a true island off the coast of Brooklyn. Hence, I mentioned that originally it was really like a destination, a resort only for the wealthy, as it was isolated from Brooklyn itself. But by the early 1900s, not only public transportation began connecting the area to the rest of Brooklyn, but also Coney Island Creek was filled in along a long stretch, directly connecting Coney Island with the rest of Brooklyn. However, as you stand in Kaiser Park, one thing that really catches your eye is that right there. What in the world is that? Well, it's a submarine, an actual submarine from the late 1960s. And you cannot see it too well from this angle, but in fact there are many abandoned ships in this small area here. And so I just had to make my way to the other side to show it to you from closer. And that is how we now arrive at the Culvert Vaux Park. So now we are standing on the other side of the Coney Island Creek, and in this area, along with the submarine, you see a number of other abandoned vessels. And there is many of them. I am sure that there is even more which are submerged under the water. Now, when it comes to this area, other than just the few things that I mentioned in this video, I do not know much about it, even though I grew up in Brooklyn. Although, to be fair, I grew up on the other side of Brooklyn in the Williamsburg, Greenpoint neighborhoods. Therefore, whenever I did come to Coney Island, it was to the beach and the attractions here. Therefore, this park I am fairly unfamiliar with. For instance, I do know that part of it used to be a place for unwed mothers. The Dreyer Offerman home, which closed in 1933. And so that part I do know because about a year ago or so, I was putting a video together about the Inwood Hill Park in Upper Manhattan. And so when I was walking through that area, I found out that there used to be the House of Mercy there, a home for the unwed mothers as well. And I came across this name here. Hence, the beginnings go back to 1934, when at least a portion of this land was to be designated as sort of a park, although the park itself was extensively extended in the 1960s. As they were building the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, the debris and soil was placed here, hence expanding the area into what you see today. However, anything beyond this information, I really don't know much. For instance, what is the story with all of these abandoned ships? And so, not knowing the history, I turned to the books that I have at home, but in none of them I could really find any useful information about this area. And so then what I did is try to look for something online, which again is something I try to avoid doing for my videos. But for this particular video, I thought that maybe I can get some ideas or guidance of what to look for. And surprisingly, there is not too much information out there on the internet as well. But it does seem like at least most of these here ships were abandoned in the 1960s and 70s. The ships would be stripped down of their valuable components, which included metals like iron, copper, brass. All of these metals you can reuse or at least sell on scrap yards, but the wooden remains were just dumped in this area to avoid paying the fees to either have the ships properly scrapped or be docked at terminals. And of course, among all of these shipwrecks, we also have what's called the Yellow Submarine. It actually does have a pretty interesting history of which there's a little bit more information out there. For instance, it's called Quester 1, and it was built by Jerry Bianco, who was working at shipyards here in Brooklyn. He built the submarine in the late 1960s out of salvaged materials from scrapyards. His goal was to get to the wreck of Andrea Doria, which sunk in 1956 due to a collision with another ship, Stockholm. Andrea Doria was an Italian luxury transatlantic ocean liner and had many valuable things on board. Hence, many dives were initiated to retrieve the valuables over the years, and in fact, many people died trying to do so. And so we have this submarine built for that purpose as well. When this submarine, however, was being lowered into the water for the first time, it tipped sideways as the crane operator made a mistake. And, well, it never made it out of New York City waters as investors began pulling away after that failed launch into the water. And then eventually it broke loose in 1981 storm, and it has been part of the area ever since. But, well, it's kind of ironic, right? I mean, a vessel built to recover a wreck itself becomes a wreck. But just like this part of New York City, I am not too comfortable with in terms of the detailed history. Another part, which also is something I know a little bit less of, is about 8 miles to the right, where we have the Canarsie Pier, which was built in 1926. If you are traveling on the Belt Parkway, it is really an easy exit to take, and it's an enjoyable place to stop by, stretch your legs, and get some fresh air. And of course, watch people fish. There is always someone fishing on this pier. Here you can see in the distance the Shirley Chisholm State Park, which I did a video on a while back, if anyone is interested in that. And as you move a bit to the right, you see the tower of John F. Kennedy International Airport. Hence, also a fun spot to sometimes look at planes as they take off or land. But it's not this pier in particular that is puzzling to me, although this might be an area I will revisit at some point in the future. But if we walk a bit away from the pier, on the left side, there used to be something really cool here. Canarsie in general was a farming and, well, really a mainly fishing community all the way up to like World War II, the 1940s or so. However, at one point, it really tried to become like a rival to Coney Island Beach itself. Coney Island Beach at its height had 3 amusement parks: Steeplechase, Luna, and Dreamland. Well, here in Canarsie in 1907, another amusement park opened, Golden City Park, which stood here until 1939. Right here behind this community garden today is where the park was located, and it had numerous rides, a circus, and many other attractions. In fact, the whole area had some nice hotels, And since 1926, the Canarsie Pier, which I just showed as well. But all of this was to be much bigger, and really a true rival to Coney Island for entertainment. However, it just never really took off, and by the 1930s, it was no longer profit-making. And so in 1939, the park closed, was torn down, and the Belt Parkway was built in its place. But here too, I honestly do not know the detailed history behind the amusement park as well, just like I don't really know the history with the Coney Island Creek and all the abandoned ships that I showed earlier in this video. And so these are two examples of locations in Brooklyn with really interesting history, but ones that I'm not too familiar with. Just to show you that there's always something to learn about the city. Once you think you have heard everything, you come across something new, something unexpected. And this is what makes history fascinating. It's not just trying to remember names and dates as sometimes students think, but it's this, trying to uncover the stories which took place earlier. So for instance, with these two locations, since I know less about them, if I was a historian who dealt with this type of research, I would go in, try to look for as many sources as I possibly could get my hands on. So articles, books, newspapers, but like all the secondary sources that I could really sort of find. Then I would visit archives, especially local archives, historical societies, libraries, look at older maps and photographs, maybe even try to get in touch with people who lived in the 1940s and 50s in this area. And then, of course, walk around the area itself, try to get a feel for how it might have looked like in the past. It's a lot of work, and it's also tremendously time-consuming. But along the way, you might just uncover history and stories which almost no one ever heard before. And you could contribute to the remembrance of the topic, which honestly might have been simply lost from the memory of the city itself. At the same time, you will hopefully better understand the area, how it developed and changed over the years, why things are the way they are, and the problems and the issues that it experiences today. This is really what makes history come alive, and that is why I enjoy it, and why I find significance in it. So I do hope you enjoyed this very short video, and summer is coming up. I really have a lot of great locations planned, so definitely stay tuned, and I will see you soon. Bye.